So welcome everyone, and also to the ones joining online. It's good to have everyone here today. So we're about, how many are we here? Like 20, 30 persons, and another, how many are so in the room online? Another 50 online. So thank you very much for taking the time this morning to join. So my name is Philippos Anagnostopoulos. I work for the Institute for European Energy and Climate Policy, and I'm the coordinator of the SENSEI project. And today we're having the final event of our project after 3 years. Also today we have Zolfi, who is a graphic recorder, and will be making a visual summary. Do you want to perhaps share the screen for everyone to have an idea what this will be? You've seen these things online, it's quite fancy. So yes, as we speak, things will be drawn and recorded, and eventually we will use them either as a video or some nice animation. So what we stay here stays in this beautiful manner. We will present the progress that has been achieved over these past 3.5 years, the policy aspects that relate to the energy efficiency of the building sector, and also the steps and opportunities that we can take based on the outcomes from our project. So we started off 3.5 years ago with quite some ambition already, actually from the proposal phase. And what we aimed to do was to investigate pay-for-performance schemes to see how they can support retrofits and reward efficiency as an energy resource and as a service to the grid. So I'll summarize a few of the things that we did, and then we can start with the presentations. So we have done work that identifies where energy efficiency has value for the power system. And we have also managed to quantify this value compared to the supply side resources that we usually use. We have also investigated the agreements and the rules that govern the exchange between various market actors. So here we speak about building owners, utilities, TSOs, aggregators, ESCOs, and everyone who is willing to be involved in energy efficiency agreements. We have engaged with investors and finance institutions to understand how pay-for-performance agreements can be financed for retrofit projects, and also the role of third-party financing there. We designed some smart services for pay-for-performance. We worked with stakeholders to support their initial understanding on these schemes. And we have also put forth business models to support the uptake of pay-for-performance. So you hear a lot of pay-for-performance, and I think that's the core what the project is about. So what we did for that, we created a few guidelines and tools that are aimed to facilitate the adoption of these schemes that we know work in the US. And we have focused on pay-for-performance models because they enable all these efficiency gains to be something of a resource for the power system. So there we have explored what's the role of DSOs, of utilities, to compensate energy efficiency measures based, of course, on meter savings, usually in the context of energy efficiency obligation schemes. This is one of the main instruments so far that we see these can click on. We've seen how individual retrofit projects can be aggregated into larger portfolios of buildings, and how these portfolios of retrofit projects can be an attractive investment for financial institutions that require more long-term stable returns on their investment. What helps there is the better risk management strategies that they can offer, standardization, and the predictability of performance. So as we bring all of this together, we see how pay-for-performance can be used to value investments in demand-side measures, and how this can be an alternative to more costly upgrades to the power grid. a key thing that I want to mention is that a lot of these have been possible because of advancements in monitoring and verification. These are technological developments that we didn't have like 10, 20 years ago. And because of their availability nowadays, we can essentially value energy savings much better. So we have more granular energy consumption data. We can use advanced analytics. We can use dynamic processing and have more reliable, almost just-in-time estimations of actual savings. So 3 years later, we published over 20 very content-intensive reports on multiple of aspects that relate to pay for performance, and I have here a few. So we looked at the value of energy efficiency as an energy resource. We looked at experience from the US and the lesson learned from pay for performance pilot. We designed guidelines for how to set up pay for performance schemes. We look at variants of those on how to engage third-party investors. We designed the business model of the energy efficiency aggregator, which is a rather new entity, and quite a few more. And very importantly, we have also developed a very advanced tool for monitoring and verification. It's called Insight with a double E, which basically creates an energy efficiency meter. A little bit in terms of impacts so far. We had these deliverables, scientific publications, and so on. We have reached an audience of more than 5,000 professionals, and the reports and publications have been cited 180 times. And then we have released a number of articles, close to 20. We had 17 videos, 4,000 views, a lot of newsletters, over 1,000 subscribers, over 20 events. We have reached another 1,000 professionals in person. And all this has led is, of course, to a wealth of information that can be used for future reference and professionals when we start setting up such schemes. And we are also in discussions at the moment with about 10 organizations like DSOs, ESCOs, real estate companies that are interested to explore pay for performance further. So today, this is one of our last public activities. We will offer a much more condensed version of our whole work, and we hope that you will find it very useful for your purposes. So we will start with a presentation of the policy background on the new Energy Efficiency Directive by Margot Pinot, who is a policy officer at DG Ener. And then we will have a panel discussion with policy experts that will cover building policies, finance, and business. Then we'll have a brief coffee break if we're still on track. Otherwise, hop, take a coffee, come back. And we will have some selected presentations from the SENSEI project. We will look at the main aspects of it, some of the experience from the US, guidelines how to set up, and finish also with a study on how pay for performance can be applied in Catalonia. And in the end, we finish off with a panel of the first attempts to set up a pay for performance scheme, notably in the UK, and the efforts we're taking also in other places in Europe, for example, Belgium. So that's a quick summary on my side. Thank you very much for your attention, and then I'll give the floor on to Marco.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. I'm very happy to set the policy context for this conference that is very relevant for energy efficiency and for the current context where we are speaking more and more about flexibility, about how to valorize demand side resources, and and this I will try to present. I work in DG Energy Efficiency Unit for 10 years already, and currently I'm involved in the negotiations of the revision of the directive, Energy Efficiency Directive. But specifically, I'm looking at the articles related to energy services, so energy performance contracting, about which I would like to speak a little bit more in detail in this presentation. But first, let's set the general context. As you know, we have a very unusual and strange geopolitical situation, which is creating a totally new reality, geopolitical market reality for energy sector, with very high and unstable, volatile prices, insecurity of energy supply, which urges the action to end the dependence on fossil fuels for the reason of climate, but also, of course, for the reason of security of supply, and the dependence on Russian fossil fuels, and overall to speed up the energy transition and tackle the climate crisis. And in this context, if we could move to the next slide, thank you. In this context, the European Union responded very vigorously, because last year the Commission has proposed unprecedented number of legislative acts, policy papers to respond to the crisis, and you have the list of it here on the screen. I will not go into detail, but the overarching, let's say, strategy is the Repower EU plan that exactly aims at ending the dependence on Russian fossil fuels to by 2027 through clean energy transition, through energy savings, and also diversification of energy supply. But before and after, there were a number of legislative acts that were issued, and those are aiming very much at reducing energy demand, the gas demand, but also electricity demand. For example, the regulation on emergency intervention to address high energy prices is also looking at electricity sector, setting the obligation to shave the peak of electricity consumption by 10% in EU member states, by 5%, sorry, and 10% overall electricity demand by spring this year, actually. So, yeah, there is a very dynamic, I would say, general context in the energy sector. In the next slide, and yes, sorry, and the last point that was here on the slide, and which is I just would like to highlight because it's really an important element, is the new electricity market design that is now being under preparation, and that we expect by the end of March to be adopted as the Commission proposal, because indeed we need to adapt the way how the electricity market works to tackle the volatility of prices, to decouple the prices of electricity from the prices of fossil fuels that are sometimes driven by speculation, sometimes driven to very, very high peaks, and make EU citizens benefit to a wider share of renewables that is incorporated into the electricity mix more and more. And increase the stability of the prices. So all of this, how to make electricity market fit for a bigger share of renewables, how to valorize precisely the demand side resources, the demand side flexibility, all of these questions are being now analyzed, and the new tools are being drafted in this legislative proposal, which we expect on the 24th of March, I think. So that is very relevant for the context of our discussion today, because energy efficiency, energy demand side flexibility will be able to be valorized by electricity markets, and we hope that this will indeed create a totally new business environment for various actors, including ESCOs, including energy performance contracting companies. The next slide, please. One more slide about the general context. So the Repower EU plan that was issued in June last year, on 27th of June. As I said already, has these three objectives: to save energy, to diversify energy suppliers, and to accelerate investments in renewables to make European Union independent by 2027 from the fossil fuels supply from Russia. And under this, there was a number of very interesting policy initiatives, strategies, which I would like to quickly share with you, because they are changing also how the demand side will look in the future, because indeed there is an acceleration of rollout of renewables also at the consumer premises. There is more stress on energy efficiency by increasing the energy efficiency target for 2030 from 9% that was proposed initially in 2021 to 13%, increasing the renewables target, but also other initiatives like, for example, solar rooftop initiative, doubling rate of deployment of heat pumps, EU solar strategy. So all of this will play an important role of increasing electrification of the demand side, of phasing out of fossil fuels in the direct final use, and making the energy system working totally differently, where the demand side will be more dynamically adapting to the supply. The next slide, please. Here I would like also to highlight once again that energy savings are at the core of policy attention now. So EU Safe Energy Plan was issued together with the Repower EU communication, with guidance to member states how to attract attention to the savings measures, and following that, member states indeed put in place numerous measures at national level that the Commission is monitoring, and that we are gathering the reporting from member states, and that helped us indeed to be better prepared for current winter. But the winters ahead of us are still a challenge, because as we know, we don't have the gas supplies back, and we have no view of having it back at the precedent levels. So this context will stay with us for some time. The gas demand reduction plan set the target of 15% of gas use reduction in Europe by next spring, this spring. And as said already, the electricity demand reduction target was set at 10%, with the peak consumption shaving by 5%. But all of these energy savings actions are really a short-term actions, but we need also a more sustainable framework for our policy and climate objectives. So in the next slide, if you could please change, I would like to highlight that indeed energy efficiency is the right answer to reduce the dependence on fossil fuels and to meet our climate goals. And that's why the initially proposed target for 2030 in Fit for 55 package of 9% comparing to baseline scenario from 2020 was proposed to be increased to 13%. And at this moment, there is not yet an agreement, as you know, on energy efficiency directive, because it's under the negotiations. But indeed, the Commission proposal is to have this target set at 13%, because as it was modeled in the current environment of high energy prices, this objective, this target is cost effective, is feasible, is technically feasible, and is especially cost effective because we are operating in a totally different market environment, and energy efficiency pays off much quickly. So now this is everything about the general context, and on the next slide you will see the main elements of the revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive. The overall target, which I said already, but also energy efficiency first principle that is put into the EU law. So we have a new article, Article 3, that is setting this principle and underlying that it should be applied to any decision-making process, whether it's a policy. So yes, the other element of the revision of the directive which I would like to highlight is the energy savings obligation, as it was also highlighted in the context of SENSEI project. This is indeed what is setting the obligation on energy sellers, on energy providers, if this is implemented as energy efficiency obligation scheme, to realize energy savings in the final use. And it can be a basis of interesting business models. That's why we continue with this obligation in the directive, and we hope that indeed it will create on the market actors kind of obligation that will drive energy efficiency being valorized as a business case. So here in the revision of the directive, we propose the target 1.5% of final energy savings in end use. With also a focus on alleviating energy poverty, so a specific share of this savings and use savings should be realized among energy poor people, because of course what we aim at is a just transition, and energy poverty issue is more and more of importance because of the current difficult high prices environment in which we are living. So the policy attention to energy efficiency and energy poverty alleviation is increased. Another element which I wish to highlight, is the strengthened exemplary role of public sector, with one chapter of the directive that is focusing on public sector, 3 articles concretely. Article 5, which is setting an overall target on the public sector, target of energy consumption reduction per year. So 1.7% of final energy consumption in the public sector should be saved each year in the public sector. Then the Article 6, focusing on public buildings. This article is not new. We have already this obligation in Energy Efficiency Directive. But with the 3% of yearly renovation of the useful floor area of all public administration buildings. What is new is that now it goes beyond the central government buildings and is really covering all public administration, all levels, so local, regional level. And what is also new, and this I will maybe show later, is that we expect the renovation to be a deep renovation. We go to the NZEP level. So that's the second article focusing on public sector, so Article 6, and finally Article 7, that is focusing on public procurement and highlighting energy efficiency in public procurement using energy efficiency first principle. And yes, among the criteria that are used for public procurers, energy efficiency must be one of those. And how it is concretely applied, it is more specified, better specified in the annex. Where energy efficiency, more detailed specific legislation exists, like eco-design, then the reference is made to the specific provisions from this legislation. If not, the overall principle of energy efficiency first should apply in public procurement. And finally, another element which I wish to highlight is the new definition of efficient district heating and cooling, where the objective is a progressive phase out of fossil fuels also from this sector. It's a very difficult sector to decarbonize because it depends, of course, on the network, because we have various types of district heating in Europe. But in the eastern member states, these are mostly large networks based on one central supply of heat, of high temperature heat. And this is really a challenge to move to the next generation of district heating networks, and that will be based more on renewables, more flexible and decarbonized. So that's why so much attention in Energy Efficiency Directive to decarbonize this sector of heating and cooling. In the next slide, I will dive a little bit more deeply into the provisions looking specifically at energy performance contracting. So as you probably know, currently in the current directive that is in force now, it's Article 18 that is focusing on energy services. And in the future directive, the recast directive that we are now revising, it will be Article 27. And generally, the logic of the provisions that are supporting development of energy performance contracting in Europe is to set on the member states the obligation to develop a contractual side, so models of contracts, of closures, so that this comes into the business practice, that business actors can use them as kind of, on-the-shelf model of contracts. So that's one thing that we are asking member states to develop and promote. The second thing is financial instruments, so that there is financing ready to flow to this type of business on the market. So that's the second type of provisions that that are in these articles. Finally, certification and qualification of service providers. And actually, this one is also in another article. It's an Article 26 that is looking at qualification and certification schemes. And finally, what was very important in the SENSEI project and highlighted here is monitoring and verification methodologies. And here again, Article 27 is putting obligation on member states to develop and to promote kind of standardized monitoring and verification methodologies, because we need standards, we need trust on the market, and the outcomes of your project can indeed feed into this development and policy making also at national level, I think. So that's the overall logic of these provisions. Then what is new? Then, of course, member states also need to act as kind of intermediary to join the supply and the demand side, so providing information, removing barriers, promoting advisory services, putting in place one-stop shops, so that that if there are service providers and the demand side for these services, that they are meeting somewhere together, so they are informed about each other. And so that's the type of facilitation that member states also need to do, and the directive is requiring this from member states. And finally, development of quality labels based on European and international standards on energy efficiency. So again, this is about building trust on the market, ensuring that qualified service providers are labeled, and that the consumer can make an informed choices. The next slide, I think, is focusing a little bit more on what are the new requirements in Article 27, so in the revision directive. And for example, we put very much focus on public sector taking up energy performance contracting, because on the one hand, there is a big potential. And as you saw already, this directive put a lot of focus on public sector, because public sector, there is potential for buildings renovation. Public sector can serve as a exemplary role. Public sector has a lot of infrastructure, public lighting, street lighting, where energy efficiency can be valorized, and where energy performance contracting can very well be applied. Instead of using public money directly, it can be taken up by the private actors, and the investment can be paid off by energy savings. So that's the overall logic, and that's why in Article 27 there is also strong focus on the take-up of energy performance contracting in the public sector. And there is encouragement for public bodies when renovate large buildings. And what is large, we are actually also defining in the directive as above 1,000 square meters of useful floor area. So these are large public buildings. Those has to consider energy performance contracting in priority. Moreover, there is a trigger for what you are doing actually, expanded energy performance contracting services. So not only looking at energy efficiency for paying off, but also demand response, storage. So bringing all the possible services that the demand side can provide to the system, and valorize this and test it in the environment of public sector, so public buildings, for example. So it's an interesting trigger, and we will see later if this can trigger more business model development. So indeed, as I said already, large non-residential buildings of above 1,000 square meters that belongs to public body have to assess the feasibility of using energy performance contracting. And so they need to justify if they don't use it. They just need to justify why it was not feasible to use it. And also there is the increased advisory role of advisory bodies, one-stop shops. So this I already mentioned, that will facilitate joining the demand and supply side. The next slide, I think it's repeating a little bit what I said as regards the public sector. So because you need to consider this as a package, So on the one hand, we are looking at energy performance contracting. On the other hand, we are setting the obligation on the public sector that they renovate the building, that they reduce their energy consumption, and jointly this should work together. And the next slide, I think, is about where in the public sector related articles we have also repeated energy performance contracting obligation. Yes, indeed, because in Article 7 on public procurement, public contracting authorities, so public procurers, shall also assess feasibility and long-term energy performance contracting for contracts with significant energy content. So you see, we have kind of triggers, yeah, a little bit everywhere in this directive to make the energy performance contracting used by public sector. So hopefully this will indeed create the right environment, regulatory environment for promotion of this business. In the next slide, I give a short overview. What are the main provisions in the revised EPBD proposal, though it's not the directive on which I'm working, but of course I'm aware of what is happening there. And the EPBD is being revised with a little bit, let's say, they started a little bit later, so they are a little bit earlier in the process. But at this time, I think that there was already a general approach agreed on the council side, and I think that the parliament is or will be voting very closely from now on their proposal, and then they will enter into the stage of trilogues, in which stage we are now with the energy efficiency directive. Actually, maybe I should have said that before. But what is new in the EPBD and what is super strong is minimum energy performance standards. This is a very strong measure because it means phasing out all the worst performing buildings from the EU building stock, basically, because at some point of time, we will not be able to rent or to sell or to keep buildings that are below some energy classes. That's the proposal. So as you can see here, by 2027, all the classes of non-residential buildings below F should be phased out, should be renovated. Normally should be renovated because that's what we are promoting, actually not destroying them unless it's really unfeasible to renovate them. So 2027 class F, 2030 class E, that will be the minimum standard for non-residential buildings. And then the residential, it's a little bit more difficult because we have multiple ownership and it's a little bit more difficult so to find financing for individual owners. And that's why the pace is a little bit slower, but the same logic. So by 2030, class F is the minimum standard in Europe, and 2033, class E. And this is super important because this will indeed trigger the renovation. There will be an obligation to renovate. Another thing that I would like to highlight is the definition of deep renovation. And that will be defined and that will be going to the zero emission buildings at some point, but this I have in another slide. Worth highlighting phase out of subsidies to fossil fuels, fossil fuel boilers, so fossil fuel heating by 2027. That's in the original proposal. We now have even more ambitious objective 2025 in the negotiations, so we'll see how it will end up. But this is important that we stop, subsidizing fossil fuel heating, which is creating a locking effect for consumers. And then recharging of electric vehicles. This is, of course, in the spirit of the electrification of transport sector and electrification of end uses, which is in general how we see this transition to happen. As much as we can electrify, this is better for energy efficiency. And in the next slide, I think it's a focus on the new buildings. So the new buildings from nearly zero energy to zero emission buildings, with more overarching criteria, looking at wider range of criteria, not only energy efficiency, that's the life cycle global warming potential that will need to be calculated as of 2030, and that will be based on the levels framework that was developed by DG Environment, so life cycle of carbon emissions, so more complete way of looking at the building, of what it is made of, what were the emissions in the given stage of its life cycle. And on-site renewables, district heating and energy communities. So those zero emissions buildings will have to have their own renewables local sourcing, either from on-site or from district or from community, but the remaining supply of energy will need to be provided by renewables that are located nearby somewhere to the building. I think that this is everything that I would like to highlight in the regulatory framework. The last slide is about financing. So if you could move to the last slide, it is just to tell you that this will, of course, cost a lot of money, and this is not a mystery to anyone. So there were some calculations made, for Fit for 55 package, we would need like 150 billion euro for repower use, so ending up the dependence on fossil fuels by 2027, then we need 300 billion euros, so doubling the size of needed investments. So it's incredible. It's really huge amount of money. There are sources of public funding. There are sources of EU funding, which are highlighted here. but without private investments, we'll do not that much. So we absolutely need to trigger private investments, mobilize private actors, mobilize innovative business models like the one here developed by this project and investigated by this project, and hopefully this will take up in the EU and help our energy system to become more flexible and our overall life become more energy efficient, so that we use energy in a more efficient manner. So this is everything from my side. I hope that this was relevant for the context of this discussion today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Very much, and thank you. Quite a few important comments on how we can trigger this work. So for the next panel, Marion, I'll allow you to take the lead and introduce everyone.
Yes, does it work, my mic? Okay, cool. Well, Hélène and Michael, please come on stage. We have Murray online. I'm going to introduce the panelists shortly. Thanks a lot to Margot for this very good introductory remarks and for setting the scene for the policy discussions we are having right now. So my name is Marianne Santini. I work for the Regulatory Assistance Project. We're a nonprofit working on the energy transition. We are present in Europe, in the US, China, and India, and we have been involved with the SENSEI project with a lot of interest because we believe that this innovative business model could actually change the game for energy efficiency and demand response in the EU. Even before Repower EU was in place, buildings were expected to deliver a large share of the 2030 climate goals. And there is now this growing understanding that flexibility of buildings can also bring a lot to the energy transition and also to the Repower EU goals. Now there is the ongoing revision of the directive, so the Efficiency Directive, Renewables Directive, and there is also this opening of the electricity market design files, which is very important to those issues. This is why we are having this discussion today. I will now turn to our panel, which is made of policy experts, which bring a different perspective to these issues, and we will discuss the future of building policy in EU. So. And then I will ask Margot to respond to these comments. But first, I will turn to Hélène Sibilo from BPIE. So, Hélène, you work for the Building Performance Institute Europe. You know buildings policy very well. You're providing recommendation on how it can be improved and how it should be implemented. What do you think is currently missing in EU building policy?
Thanks, Marion, for the question, and thanks for the invitation. I would actually maybe like to start responding to this question by looking at what already exists now. We know a lot has been done already in the past years, and looking at EU regulations on buildings, we have the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which exists for over 20 years now. We are now at the third revision, so a lot exists already. And we often talk about actually what needs to be implemented on the ground. So a lot of things exist in text, but what we need to speed up is actually transposition and implementation. Nonetheless, I think it's interesting to look at what we have and also how much it delivers or how much it doesn't deliver to teach us what is missing and how differently we could do things. And here I maybe want to reflect on indeed the existing toolbox versus what we are achieving in terms of innovation rate and depth on the ground, which is not at the levels that we need to achieve our targets. And compared that to what actually drives building decarbonization and renovation on the ground. And we know from research that if you look at the different drivers for building renovation, of course, you have high energy prices. For some households, this is a trigger to renovate to decrease their energy bills. We also have drivers like people that want to just have a better comfort, improve their health, basically just improve the way they feel and live in their buildings. We have external triggers, for example, your boiler breaks down or you suddenly need to replace something that is not working anymore, or you're just changing your buildings, you're renting somewhere else, you're buying a new building. Those are all triggers for renovation. But the one that we're often forgetting, which is for me the most important, are policy drivers. And as it was said before, regulation, binding measures, mandatory provisions, obligations, this is what actually works and triggers renovation, both increasing the rate and also increasing the depth. We have a lot of policies that are now based on incentives. So I'm not saying this is not important. It is very important. It is part of the overall picture. We have done a lot on providing information to consumers with energy performance certificates. We have done a lot of boosts to advisory services to get financial support. But all of this will not be taken up if we don't have the pull and binding obligations on renovation. If we zoom then in on, this was more like a theoretical approach, but then if we zoom in on EU level and the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, the maybe recommendations I would propose to actually then design those new policy measures are that, of course, they should be binding, as I explained. Always keeping a long-term approach and knowing where you want to go, not starting from where you are, but from where you want to go. Be more personalized to consumers. And here I'm thinking also about always keeping a social dimension. I think the renovation wave and building policies should also have this social perspective and think about the most vulnerable consumers as well. They should also be more strategic in how they segment the building stock. And we also have to fine-tune some policies based on the buildings we're approaching. Of course, a renovation in a commercial buildings will not be the same as a renovation in a multi-story apartment building. And then, as I said, a more holistic approach. We need policies and binding regulation. But if we now only do this, this will not do the trick. We should continue as well and boost, again, financing and advisory support. Some concrete measures that are now being discussed in the EPPD revision. As Margot was saying, we're in the middle of the negotiations. Minimum energy performance standards, very important. And maybe I would like to take a bit more time here and just finish on the definition of deep renovation. As Margot was saying, it's for the first time providing at the EU level in a legislation a definition for what it is. And I think it's really important, not just for the sake of having a definition, but because it will impact how we design financing programs. And if we know like the quality of a renovation, I think it will drive a lot of quality improvements and we'll make sure that we use the financing in an optimal way, both the public financing, but also the private financing. And I think it's really important to have whatever national, EU or local funding programs that ensure some proportionality between the amount of money that we are putting into the renovation and the level of savings achieved. And this idea of proportion, it seems simple, it seems common sense, but it is not accepted. For example, by member states in the council position, this is something that was not accepted. So still a lot of work to be done to make this idea go through. And I think also if we have a good definition of deep renovation, it will ensure that it will create the right demand, the demand for the right renovation projects. And this is where the pay for performance schemes will ensure and will be taken up, because we will need to have more insurance about the quality. We need to monitor more, to report, to verify that we actually achieve those important savings. So having a definition for deep renovation, the right one, will ensure that also all these business models that actually help to deliver this will be taken up. So it's basically pushing to create the demand, and then business models can, be there and flourish to deliver on them. And maybe a final point that is missing, but it's now being proposed, and at BPIE we're also really pushing out for building renovation passports. So these tools that help consumers in their renovation journey, outlining the steps and the sequence of renovation work to be undertaken. It can also have some links with the financing. And this is also something that now is really being pushed at the EU level, and member states will have to develop them. But again, it's a tool that is at the disposal of consumers, but it's not mandatory. So we really hope that it will be taken up and rolled out, because it's a very important tool for consumers. And on all that, I think we can continue the discussion, because there are so many provisions in the PPD to be discussed, but those were the three that I wanted to highlight as missing and really important to pursue.
Thank you very much, Hélène. I will turn directly to Michael Villard. Michael, you head Business Association Smart N, which represents the consumer-driven solutions to the clean energy transition. Smart N recently released some recommendations on how to meet the EU target to save electricity in peak time, the target that Margot was mentioning earlier. And Smart N is also ready to contribute to the public consultation, which started yesterday on the electricity market design. What do you think governments can do now, immediately, to increase the capacity of buildings to provide flexibility services to the grid?
Thanks, Marion, for this question and for inviting us to be here in this final conference of the SENSEI projects. It's extremely important to reduce consumption of certain types of energy. And this should be done through efficiency that will lead to static saving, but also a flexible consumption, so that consumers will consume more variable green energy and less fossil fuel energy. So that's the two, energy efficiency and demand stability should go hand in hand. And that's why we are very much happy that indeed during this emergency period last year, the Commission came up with this obligation to reduce by 5% peak electricity consumption. We are actually calculated the impact of these in 2023. And thanks to a flexible and efficient consumption, we could save 16 billion of costs related to gas, because consumers will not consume when there is peak consumption times, which is the moment where gas peaking plants will be needed to produce electricity. And in 2025, so in 2 years' time, these total savings in gas costs will double, will be reached. We are going to have 13.4 billion saved in gas costs if demand side flexibility is activated. And this is a flexible adjustment of this efficient consumption from all end user sectors, including buildings. But what do we need? We need to use the resources that are already deployed and then further deploy more of these efficient and flexible resources. Already now, LCP Delta calculated that there are already in our homes 200 gigawatts of flexible and efficient assets, which are notably HVAC system, but then are increasing chargers of electric vehicles that are indeed charged in our buildings. And then a lot of smart meters or sub-metering devices, which are also very much important assets to actually measure and quantify this adaptation of the use of these flexible resources. So that's why indeed we need to have consumers that are receiving signals or are incentivized to activate this very distributed flexible capacity that is already behind the meter. How it can be done? 2 ways. Price signals, so the exposures to prices. And as Hélène said, high energy prices have been are an incentive to improve the performance of energy, of the efficiency of our buildings, not only the efficiency, but also this flexible adaptation in real time. So blurring this kind of signals to consumers will not enable them to actually be flexible and active in the interaction with the energy systems. Another way is to actually enable consumers to actually have the incentive to activate their flexibility, because they have remuneration, because they participate and they can bid to the different electricity markets. This can be notably done through aggregators. And so the different business models that are actually incentivizing and rewarding consumers to activate this flexibility potential. Now, going into EPBD and energy efficiency, that are indeed the two policies that are now currently in revision. What is needed there? Well, by looking at specifically at the EPBD revision, we need to make sure that, yes, we improve the energy performance of the building, but this revision should be very much connected to the electricity market design, because buildings are not isolated entities. We need to improve the energy performance, and we need to improve the interaction with the surrounding energy system that they're part of. How to do that? First, very good, the ambition to have zero emission buildings, but you can indeed reduce the carbon footprint of a building, not just by deploying on-site renewables. This can be done and should be done, but also by flexibly consuming renewables that is from the system that they are connected with. So not necessarily with on-site renewables. But then very good at the solar rooftop initiative. We need to go in that direction, and we should in particular prioritize this deployment in buildings when there are a lot of demand-side assets, like indeed HVAC systems, heat pumps, but also chargers of electric vehicles. So to make sure that indeed these are not creating a congestions and increase peak demand, but they are actually already self-consuming this kind of energy. And then we need an actual quantification, in actual measurements of the actual performance of a building, not just the theoretical performance. And this is related to what I was saying before. Let's use smart meters, let's use sub-metering systems, and quantify both the kilowatt of flexible capacity and the kilowatt hours of the activated flexible potential of the buildings. This performance, this actual performance, should be linked to financing. So by achieving a certain level of performance, then there should be a remuneration. So this is very much interlinked. With regard instead to the Energy Efficiency Directive revision, and I conclude here, very good to keep pushing for the reduction in the energy needs of final end user sectors, but we need to improve this efficiency of the entire energy systems. So a systemic efficient approach is extremely needed, and we need to have the Energy Efficiency Directive to make this step to increase this ambition. And thanks to flexible and efficient end user sectors, we can achieve indeed a more efficient decarbonized energy systems, because indeed we are consuming the renewable energy in the systems, we are avoiding grid reinforcement, we are avoiding investment in unnecessary over supply needs, and so indeed, it's a more efficient way of achieving our climate neutrality objective in 2050. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. I think what you just said will resonate with a lot of the SENSEI partners that are in the room. There's a lot of, we had similar discussions all along the projects, and I think we will have the opportunity to discuss this further this morning. I will now turn to Murray, who is online. Thanks a lot for joining, Murray, despite the fact that you had train problems this morning. We're really sorry you cannot be with us, but we are very grateful you can be online, and I hope the connection will work fine. So,
yes,
Murray, you work for DWS, you support their responsible investment strategy. So you know the investors community very well. Now we've heard about all this potential for buildings to provide efficiency and flexibility service, and for this to be delivered to the grid. According to you, what are investors looking for to be able to invest in these buildings assets? What policy innovation could you imagine in this domain?
Thanks very much, and apologies that I am not able to. able to be there with you this morning, but I think it's a great work that SENSEI has done and focused on. So DWS is a major asset manager. We invest across, we have retail investors, clients, we have institutional retail clients.
I will now turn to Murray. And Murray, sorry, we will not be able to see your slides, but if you could get back to where we left things a couple of minutes ago, I will turn my mic off to avoid having a feedback loop. And we will listen to you now, trying to put the sound at the maximum so that people in the room can hear you.
Great, hopefully that works. So I work for the asset manager DWS, and energy efficiency investment is not a single asset class. It's you have to invest to improve buildings. You can invest directly in owning real estate assets. You can lend to real estate. You can be owning the shares or bonds of banks who provide mortgages to customers and loans to small businesses. You can be having direct energy efficiency funds. So there's a variety of ways that energy efficiency is valid for investors. And it's important to understand the investment chain. Our clients are pension funds and insurance companies, the asset owners, as well as retail investors, individuals, savings, and asset owners are bosses, and they help set the direction of travel along the investment chain. We then invest into companies, banks, energy companies, real estate assets, infrastructure assets, a variety of different investments to create a return. And increasingly, our clients are also wanting to achieve net zero and have other environmental and social goals. I've been privileged to be part of energy efficiency for a number of years as a member of the Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group, the steering committee, and led the committee in writing to the Commission before the renovation wave communication a couple of years ago. And part of that letter from the EFIG steering committee recommended the attention to the work of SENSEI. I've also been privileged to be co-leading the creation of guidance for real estate investors on what net zero means. And a core to that guidance is another parallel Horizon 2020 project, CREM, the Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor project, which has developed downscaling of climate science to building specific pathways for reducing energy and carbon intensity within, say, a shopping center or an office or a home in France or Germany or anywhere in the world, basically. And that guidance, those building specific pathways, are increasingly guiding real estate investors around the world to assess their stranding risk, but also what improvements they have to make to their buildings. Despite the success in getting CREM integrated within the institutional investor community, it's not yet matched by integrated into public policies. For instance, I think CREM should become a part of the EU taxonomy and principal adverse indicators, be part of the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, be part of reforming energy performance certificates, minimum building performance standards, and how banks assess their mortgage portfolios. Those are some of the finance and buildings policy reforms that are necessary, but we also need energy market reforms. And I think SENSEI could be a real part of that. Imagine if a power system operator could contract for energy efficiency savings in buildings to avoid fossil power generation. Imagine if a heating supply company could write a contract for deep thermal retrofits of a building as an alternative to importing fossil gas. Imagine if the paradigm could be flipped from retrofits being only about energy cost savings to include a new source of revenue from the contracts with energy companies that creates a cash flow that can be analyzed and used by energy service companies and by financial institutions. And imagine if the energy carbon reductions from building retrofit programs, for instance, the energy obligations on utilities, is more accurately measured instead of just estimated or deemed. But I don't think we have to imagine this future. It's actually here now. many US states, and this is one of the SENSEI reports, has looked at the US experience with pay for performance. And I think the upcoming electricity market reform needs to look at how these lessons can be integrated and how these lessons of SENSEI can be shared with utilities, both power and gas, energy market regulators and policymakers in member states, as well as financial institutions and the energy efficiency community, to really flip what's meant by energy market reform to really integrate energy efficiency first. So I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Murray. I will now turn to Margot to ask her to respond to those remarks by our panelists. We heard about obligations. We heard about activating existing assets that are available throughout our building stock. We heard about bringing new assets to be able to bring flexibility and energy efficiency services to the grid. We heard about aggregators being able to put these services together and being able to provide them to grid operators. That is indeed already happening in the US, and this is one of the findings of the SENSEI project. Margot, how do you see these elements evolving forward now that we almost have a new energy efficiency directive and that a new energy performance of buildings directive? So there will be new incentives and new obligations. Do you think there is a potential for these new business models, or perhaps not so new business models, to emerge and develop their potential in Europe?
Yes, thank you very much for this interesting discussion, inspiring remarks indeed. And I'm kind of reassured because many elements that you mentioned, both of you, Helen and Michael, they are in the legislation. And I hope that, you know, the missing piece of the puzzle will come with the EMD, so energy market design, in March. Indeed, Helen, you mentioned obligation to renovate buildings. This, as we know, it is included, and we hope will go forward. And this will indeed create a very strong requirement on all market actors to go forward. The social dimension that you highlighted is overall in the EPBD and in the EED, focusing on worst performing buildings, focusing on social housing, focusing on energy poverty overall. So I think that here the answer is right. What Michael said is interesting, and I've heard these comments already before as regards the definition of net zero buildings. Don't get us wrong, we do not want to disconnect buildings from the grid. The net zero buildings, the definition that states that the remaining part of energy should be provided by on-site renewables. It does not mean that it will be totally energy autonomous building that will be disconnected. No, these buildings, of course, will be connected in a flexible manner, in an intelligent, smart, interactive manner. But we need to, first of all, promote on-site RES because we need space for renewables, and we need to use all the space possible, and roofs, for example, is the great space. We need to promote RES in heating and cooling, heat pumps, etc. So we need to impose in the definition that these technologies are installed in priority in the buildings. Then it is logical that the best optimal use of energy is to use it for its own consumption within the building. So that's the first optimization that must be done, because like this we reduce the stress on the grid. Mm-hmm. We do not inject this and over congest the local grid. So as much as we can self-consume as much as has to be done. But of course, these buildings will be interactive and will not always be using the rest, and for the remaining part, the remaining share should be probably better said than remaining part, because it's just about the capacity. But in the dynamic operation, sometimes it will be taken from the on-site, sometimes it will be taken from the grid. But in any case, these buildings will not be disconnected from the grid. They will be, on the contrary, very actively and dynamically connected to the grid. That's the vision of the future. So. Yes, I hope that this will be well clarified in the legislation and further guidance that that what we are aiming at are well connected buildings and dynamic assets to the energy system. And then as regards the EED, I think that you said that we focus too much on the final energy use savings. Well, indeed, there is the obligation to reduce final energy, but we also have the target on primary energy. And the primary energy must also go hand in hand and be reduced, and this will increase the system efficiency in the final outcome, we hope. And energy efficiency first principle is also there to make sure that we have best system efficiency, that we system operators apply this principle. It's already in the electricity directive. It will be hopefully strengthened, and it will be hopefully put in practice, especially because that's what is actually missing, so that the system operators take the real benefit of the demand side flexibility of energy efficiency, not to overinvest in the grid and into the assets, but smartly manage their system with everything that is at their disposal. So I don't know if I replied to, I mean, to respond to what was said fully. I think that at some point we had also the question from Robert, what has changed and why should we now suddenly believe in this energy performance contracting and pay for performance, for example, business models? And I will say something very trivial, but you know, we are operating in a totally different market environment. The prices at some point, they didn't increase 5 times, not 100 times. They increase the gas prices in peak times. They increase 1,000%, 1,000% comparing to the previous pre-war, you know. So as Michael said, you know, we need to cut the fossil fuels consumption at the peak hours, because it's extremely expensive, and this will create the business model, hopefully, because if not this, I don't know what could create it. But such a level of prices, I think, should trigger the market with the right regulatory environment and with the right investment incentives. This should trigger indeed the business model to develop. So yes, hoping for all of us this, and many thanks for your good project that will bring us the right answers to put into practice.
Michael, you would like to respond?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Margot, for reacting. Maybe 2 points. Again, definitely, final and primary energy savings are extremely important. The Commission is going into that direction, but we know that the Council is against the primary obligation. So that's why also we are very much pushing also with other stakeholders to go in that direction. And we calculated that in 2030, 60 gigawatt of peak generation capacity could be avoided, so primary energy savings, if demand-side flexibility is activated. So we quantified last year with DNV about this potential. So it's an important, you know, reshift of financing that should be done instead of investing in oversupply investment, notably fossil fuels also, or to the demand side. So it's really a financing issues. The second point that I wanted to maybe stress is, yes, very good that indeed the buildings indeed needs to first deploy more on-site renewable generation, and for the rest or the remaining, or for the buildings that you cannot have these on-site renewable consumed from the grid, But this consumption from the grid needs to be measured and certified that is green energy, so that we have indeed a carbon intensity that is zero for end users. How to do that? Once again, data, digitalization is extremely important. And so we need to move towards guarantees of origins 24/7 that are actually helping tackle the type of energy that is consumed from the grid. Otherwise, it's just greenwashing, and we need to indeed use the most of the schemes that are at our availability and use most of the digitalization to have this proof, so that indeed consumers are having efficient and zero emission buildings proven with the available tools.
Thank you, Michael.
Murray, who would like to react as well online.
Thanks a lot. I was about to ask him because I saw him nodding. Murray.
Thank you. I definitely agree about the importance of shifting to a 24/7 approach to measuring carbon intensity of both renewables, but also energy savings. And I think that's definitely necessary, because just measuring on a monthly or annual carbon intensity basis was fine in the past, but we need to move to the future. And that is very much, I think, also in parallel with the work of SENSEI. So yeah, I agree about the need for, and investors have been encouraging member states and EU Parliament to look at mandatory energy performance, mandatory energy performance standards for buildings. But I think it's with this energy market reform, how can we get the work of SENSEI elevated from the work of everyone here on the room and online to actually discussing and presenting it with electricity and gas market experts, right, within the regulator community, but within the energy utility as well, and the policymaker community, in the context of this forthcoming proposals from the Commission. Energy efficiency first is the principle, and the EFIG group that I was a part of helped to contribute to that. But I think still many utilities don't really put energy efficiency first. And the obligations that are put on them from the EED is a good start. We need to be measuring that correctly on a 24/7 basis and using sort of SENSEI tools. But utilities kind of don't like obligations, because that means they sell less power and gas. So we have to somehow change the market rules to enable them to contract, and to a little bit of forcing, but to do the type of contracting and for peak shifting, but also just demand reduction on power, but probably more importantly on gas. And that's where I think the SENSEI has provided the good foundation, but we need to move ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Murray. We have about 10 minutes left in our discussion. I suggest we take one question from the room and leave each speaker some time to draw some concluding remarks. Philippos, I think you have a question.
Can you hear me? No. Yes. Okay. So we are in a system that has quite some momentum over decades and decades, and we're trying to see how the private sector can also be mobilized. And when I say private, I'm thinking of, for example, the businesses, Michael, that you represent. I'm also thinking the investment community that, Mary, you know very well, and I'm also wondering what's the role of policy. So we have certain habits, certain ways of doing business that are quite difficult to change. What, in everyone's opinion, honestly, is do we need to do to actually motivate business leaders to take a different direction from what they've been doing so far, decisively? Like MEPS, for example, is a step in the right direction, but like investors, for example, require return standardizations that we don't yet see. So anyhow, your thoughts on that, please.
Okay, so if you could think about one thing you would want to see changed in the framework, what would you choose? Hélène, would you like to start?
Yes, what comes immediately to my mind is, again, minimum energy performance standards, but if they're designed with a long-term vision, intermediate milestones with clear-cut performance standards to achieve by certain dates, I think that would give the construction and renovation sector the assurance that there is a market. Also a segmentation by building segments, because we know that different buildings need different renovation and different building owners or occupiers need different business models or financing. And I think this will also trigger the construction sector to innovate and to change how the supply chain is organized. If they don't have this visibility, this long-term vision and assurance that there will be a market, this will not in turn trigger innovation, trigger supply chain reorganization, and new business models in how we renovate. So I think it's really, a game changer and a motivation as well for them to also innovate, be more competitive, and provide, consumers with tailored, easy solutions, because there will be a big market for which they will have to fight for.
Thank you, Hélène. Michael, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks. Indeed, Smart 10 represents 80 companies of different size, multinational, scale-up, and startup, really active in integrating the consumers-driven solutions to make consumers active and flexible. And is extremely important. This flexibility is actually rewarded. How? You need to have markets that are enabling this flexible consumption to be actually valorized. This is not a question of only, yes, there is a lot of that can be done at European level, but it's actually very much national implementation issues of the principle that have already been agreed at European level. So at the moment, markets are not open to demand-side resources. System operators do not procure the flexibility that is from the market, but they are actually still thinking about deploying copper or, a very much capex approach, So we really needed to shift that kind of way so that you are enabling the remuneration of these flexible resources. And this is also very much based on the pay for performance or any kind of M&V schemes, because you are proving and then verifying and then rewarding on the basis of this activation. So it's important to link regulation with business models, and most of the time is not new, but is actually implementation of existing rules.
Thank you, Michael. Marie, would you like to go next?
Yes, I think it's a question of bridging the divides between energy market rules, buildings rules, and the financial sector rules. So there's big divides right now, and the sustainable finance disclosure regulation that is a real preoccupation of investors right now is not really aligned with the resulting of SFDR is if you're investing in an Article 9 real estate fund, it's not really prioritizing building renovation. It's prioritizing buying existing relatively green buildings. And that shouldn't be the case. It should be buying and renovating and improving buildings, and it should be buying shares of companies and really encouraging them to change. And that changes to the SFDR, changes to energy market regulation, changes to buildings policy. If we have them really going in the same direction of renovation, flexibility, and getting off fossil fuels and improving Europe's energy security, that will result in the capex that we need. So it's tricky because the rules governing insurance companies, pension funds, asset managers, utilities, buildings are complex, but they all interrelate, and those interrelationships need to be strengthened and corrected in a number of areas. Thanks.
Thank you. So I will give the last word to Margot. Margot, you are heavily involved in the negotiations of the Energy Efficiency Directive, and you will I'm sure go back to your colleagues in DGN with renewed interest for pay for performance schemes and the results of the SENSEI project. What will be your key takeaway from today's conversation?
Thank you, Marion. And indeed, yeah, it was a very inspiring session, and I will come back with many takeaways.
While Marie, you want to answer? I see we have another question from Jean-Sébastien in the chat. Do you think the best way is to put obligations on existing energy utilities or to make it easier for newcomers to enter the market? In case you want to answer.
Probably some sort of requirements on existing utilities, I think will start to change things. The role of startups, I think, are there, and they can do more. But in a way, we need existing companies to adopt some of the startup practices, either by acquiring those companies or contracting with them in some way. So yeah, we definitely do need to support the innovative companies, but the existing operators and grid companies need some changes too.